Ladies and gents, welcome back to another video here on the JP on Comms YouTube channel. It's time for, of course, another creating conversation. This is following the big support I gained on one of the previous videos, creating conversation about all things Maidstone United, and of course following the results of this poll that I'll put just here. Obviously it does seem that most people who are voting on what they want to see on the channel do like the creating conversation style video, so why not deliver some more, of course. So as by the title of this video, you will be able to tell that we're going to be talking about who Maidstone United must keep a hold of going back into the National South next season. So we're going to be talking about some results of some questions I've been asking, and we're going to talk about my own thoughts on those results and who personally I would like to see kept a hold of going into next season, who I think are the most important players in the most important areas for this Maidstone team. So to kick things off, I did do a quick post on Facebook and a quick post on Twitter a few days ago before the Southend match, and after the signing of Sam Bone for next season, which I think is a very good deal, something that is going to work well for both of us. Of course, Sam was probably quite likely to stay, considering he up and left Ireland to move back to Maidstone, a town he holds very dearly, of course, with a lot of family here. So it was something I could always see being a possibility, and I think that works out well for us as well, as he's a pretty good quality player in a position we are lacking in at the moment, especially going into next season with the likes of Greenwich maybe being up in the air as well. And of course we're going to be losing players like Zuma, which some people might not argue is a bad thing. But of course that did prompt the question that I asked last week. So who is it that the Maidstone fans believe are the most important players we should be tying down for contracts going into next year's campaign? Well, the results were quite interesting. I think there was a few in there that did pose a few questions. There was a few, at least for me, who were pretty much stonewallers in who we should be bringing in for next season in terms of, trying to maintain them at the club. And the first person who did come up in these polls, the most frequently mentioned player, was of course George Fowler. Many players or people's player of the season this year, someone who has been incredibly consistent despite being played out of position for a lot of the season, being chopped and changed around, not having a consistent back four for a decent stretch of games throughout the entire season. And of course, it's going to be very tough for him come the end of this season, because he's going to be part of the team that's conceded the most in the league, and I don't really think that's a fair reflection on his efforts this season. I think he's been someone who has done fantastically well. He's someone who's actually captained the side lately as well, with Jerome Binnom-Williams being injured and Gavin Hoyt being injured. He's been the most senior player in the team in recent weeks, only 25 years old as well. So I think he's someone who's still got a lot more to offer us, especially going back into the South next season. And obviously most of the fans do agree. He was mentioned 14 times, 14 votes he did get across Twitter and Facebook respectively, and that was 3 more than the second most mentioned player, which was Sam Corn. Now for me this was actually quite an interesting one. Obviously Sam Corn has not featured in this side for quite a long time, I believe since the Dorking away game at the tail end of last year. And looking at this team who's been performing week in, week out, obviously Sam's not really been there, and everybody held Sam in such a high regard after last season, and deservedly so. He was certainly one of the more influential players in the team with the amount of goals he contributed last year in the South. He's certainly a good player for that league, and I think if we'd had him more this season, we probably would have seen ourselves pick up a few more points here and there. But he was the second most mentioned player. I think looking at the position he plays in this team, obviously we're lacking in that midfield role. Booty probably looking likely to go, obviously with his quality and his loyalties to the northern part of the country with family and friends up there. So you never know, we may see him move on. And I think Corn is certainly someone who we need to see staying at the club. I am a little bit surprised he's such a high priority considering how long he's been injured for. Obviously, a lot of people's argument for Luque being let go by the club in recent weeks was because of how long he's been injured for. And I know Sam's not been injured for the same stretch, but still a very lengthy period. But it's interesting nonetheless to see Sam featuring so highly up. He's still a very good player, I'm sure, so I'll be looking forward to seeing him in a Maidstone shirt next season. And the third player on the list, I don't really think surprises anybody considering his recent form and his impact on the squad since coming into this side, and that is Josh Shonibare. Josh Shonibare, of course, coming in as a free agent into this side with very little experience really at senior clubs in his career. A lot of his time spent playing youth football, played a few games for Cheshunt this season as well in the earlier stages. But coming into this side, I don't think the bar was set particularly high for him. I think we were maybe just hoping for someone that might add a little bit of pace that we lost with Christy Patterson leaving the club within the surrounding time period that he joined. And I think with Josh, he's someone who has brought a bit of life back to this team. He's someone who's brought a bit of hope, a bit of desire in the attacking third, which we haven't seen a lot of this season. And for me, he's a fantastic player, someone who I've been really impressed by. For me, the standout player in this side since he came into the squad, which, of course, considering how little goals we've scored this season, I think we are in the bottom 3 in the National League for goals scored. He's already managed to pick himself up quite a handful. So he is third on the list with 10 votes. That's one behind Sam Corn. That puts him in third place. And he is quite a stretch ahead of the next player in this list. Now, the next player in the list is someone who I've already mentioned in Regan the Wand Booty. Now, Regan picked himself up 6 votes across my following. And it did seem that many people who were mentioning him did seem to kind of neglect the idea that he might stay. Just because of what I mentioned earlier. Obviously, he's got a lot of family and friends in the north. He's quite clearly above the quality of your typical National South player, and definitely could find a home somewhere in the National League, which does lead me to believe he will move on at the end of this season. But that may, of course, have prompted less people to mention him. They may have already been resigned to the fact that he may well leave at the end of this season, and of course, that did only pick him up 6 votes. But very instrumental player in our team. Had Sean on the commentary against Southend just over the last couple of days mentioned that he's got nearly 20 goal involvements in the National League, or I think it might have been all competitions this season. And considering how few goals we've scored, he's been so influential in the ones we have. We're going to lose a big part of that team if he does not remain in the squad for next season. So he's certainly someone I'd love to see stay, and he is going to be in my top 5 as well. A little bit of a spoiler towards the end of this video, but going on to the next player in the team, and it is, I believe, one of the players of the season last season. That is Jerome Binnom-Williams. Now, Jerome did pick up 5 votes in this questioning, and it did seem a little bit underwhelming for me. I am someone who holds Jerome Binnom-Williams in a very high regard. I was very surprised that a lot of people weren't mentioning him more, and I think again they may be just resigned to the fact that it doesn't seem that he's too key in what George Elokobi has planned going forward. Of course, the vice captain in this side now, Gavin Hoyt, has been out for so long. Jerome has been the captain for large periods of this season, but he's not without his faults, which of course some people may hold in higher importance than others. Fitness has always been a bit of a key problem for Jerome. Of course, he has picked up quite a few knocks throughout this season and last. And of course, going back into the south, he's getting a little bit older. I still think he's perfectly fine to play in this team. He's someone I'd love to have starting for us next season. But of course, looking at how George Elokobi is trying to do things seemingly in this Maidstone team, it does seem that he's trying to slowly usher out a lot of the older players in this squad, as we've seen with Luque, as we're seeing Joe Lowell leaving and things like that. I don't think that we're going to see too many players over the age of maybe 26, 27 next season. We've seen a few lineups recently where, as I said earlier, George Fowler's been the oldest player on the pitch at 25. So I do think that's the direction we're heading in, and it wouldn't surprise me if Jerome didn't stay for next season. But I would love him to. I really would love him to stay. But he did pick up 5 votes, so obviously there's a few people who do agree with that statement too. Now, the next 2 for me are probably the most interesting. They're going to be the last 2 that I do mention on this list before we get into the 1 and 2 votes. But the next highest person on the list, so that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th player that people want to see most stay in this Maidstone team for next season, is Tom Hadler. Now, for me, Tom Hadler is obviously someone who had a very good season last year in the South, was one of the better keepers in the National League South last season, but has been kept out of the team for the majority of this season for whatever reason. He did not seemingly get on particularly well with Hakan Hayretin and Terry Harris. He was left out of this side for the majority of the season by Yusuf Mersin at the start. Maybe not a wise choice. Maybe it was, who knows. And then Ryan Sanford. For me, Ryan Sanford is the next class above in terms of goalkeeper. Unfortunately, he did get injured, of course, and return from his loan. But he's someone I'd love to come back for next season. And then, of course, Dan Barden, who, again, I feel is probably better than Hadler and Mersin. All 3 have their attributes. Mersin, great at coming off his line. Hadler, very commanding in the box. Barden, I think, is a great all-rounder. So, for me, it was a bit of a surprise to see Hadler voted for so many times. For me, the 2 times I really can remember Hadler playing in this season were that game just the other day against Bromley, where he did make that big error in the 95th minute to lose us that game 3-2. And Bournemouth away earlier on in the season as well, where he had a bit of a howler, conceding a cross, a couple of other shots which went in, which of course potentially he could have done a little bit better with. So, I'm not trying to knock him at all. I do think he's probably, out of the options that actually remain at the club, the best keeper we've got. But I think there's potential to do better. I think, again, a lot of people probably would have voted for Tom. In the same reasons I would have voted for Tom. I think out of what we have at the club, he's probably our best goalkeeper. Mersin, unfortunately has made a lot of mistakes throughout the season. Not always his own fault, but at the end of the day, that's who the stick is going to fall back on. If you're conceding the goals and you're in the net, it's going to be you that takes the criticism a lot of the time. They're not both without their faults, but like I say, it's kind of that option, I think, really was probably what has prompted a lot of people to say Tom Hadler. So the next person in this list is going to be Juan Luque. Now, we know, as per a couple of the videos on this channel in recent weeks, that Luque has been told he can go by the club. Some people seem to think there was a bit of backtracking involved in this as well, as George Edekobi came out and said that Juan has been offered a spot to train with the club over the summer and the start of next season, should he not find a club in that time. Whether that's backtracking or whether this was something that was previously agreed and just not mentioned until the outcry did get a little bit too much, we don't know. But, a few votes in there for Luque to get him back were quite prevalent amongst people, so I thought it was worth including him in there. I think the type of player he is, he's got a lot of flair. He's someone who's very technical with the ball. His ability to find space in behind, despite not being the fastest player on the pitch, was what was so crucial to his game last season. And that's not something you lose very easily. Pace was never the most important factor in his game. So whether it's the right decision to let him go or not, we'll probably never find out. Maybe he'll end up at Dulwich next season with Hack and score 30 goals in the National South and we'll be crying. But you never know with these things. You've got to take a punt. That's seemingly what Edekobi's done here. It doesn't really back the risk of having someone like that in the side, and for me, that's understandable. So that was our top 7 players there. Fowler, Corn, Josh Shonibare, Booty, Binnom-Williams, Tom Hadler and Juan Luque. Now, that is what the fan base, at least people who have seen my post and interacted with it, have spoken about. But for me, I pretty much share a similar sentiment, not quite in that order, but near enough. So for me, George Fowler has got to be the number one person that we offer a contract to and try and retain for next season. He's certainly earned it. I feel he's a very good player. I feel he can make a significant contribution to the side next season back in the south. Number 2 for me is going to be Josh Barre. Fantastic player. Love him to bits. I think he's really, really good. Going to be a great player for us next year if we can retain him. Just want to mention as well, I have left Sam Bone and Sol Wanjao-Smith out of this list as they are already contracted to next season. Sol, when he joined last summer, did sign a 2-year deal. So he is contracted to the club next season. So offering him a new contract obviously is not really necessary. Bone just signed one, of course, too. Number 3 for me is going to be the wand, Regan Booty. I do feel that we need a dictating tempo midfielder, something we haven't really got in the side besides Regan Booty. I think that type of player is pretty hard to replace at this level of football. There's not too many of them about who can spread the ball and dictate tempos like he can, especially in the south. A little bit harder in the National League. That's why I think he's not quite been at the same standard this year as he was last. But of course, you're always going to get that in a team that's struggling with the step up. Number 4 for me is going to be Jerome Binnom-Williams. I love him. I absolutely love him. I think what he brings to the team in terms of physicality, in terms of technicality, is unrivaled. We don't have anybody else like that in the team in terms of his size and stature. You know, his presence on the ball is unrivaled in this team. We had a couple players like that last season in terms of their on-the-ball ability, but we no longer have that in this side. And for me, I think he's a really good player, someone who I think is very much suited to the National South. I think the National League tempo was just a little bit too high at times this season. I think in the South, he'd be a fantastic player for us. Again, just as he was last year. You know, the godfather of the liquid football commentary against Hemel last season. You know, it's all his doing. So, yeah, for me, he's number 4 on my list. I'd love to see him back for next season. And then going on to number 5, I couldn't really decide between these two. But for me, I've gone for Corndog or Reece Greenidge. Now, Reece Greenidge and Corndog are both players who've had significant injuries this season. Both who, unfortunately, you know, I felt they could have contributed so much more to this team than they have throughout this season. I thought Greenidge was sensational for the time that we had him. And I'd love to see him back for next season. A back 2 of maybe Bone or Fowler and Greenidge, or a back 3 of those 3, I think would just be fantastic in the National League South. It'd probably be the best defensive setup we've had in the National League South for many years. So for me, it was a big struggle choosing between the two. So I put them both in that 5th spot. I think it's quite important that we look to cover a lot of different areas with the players we want to keep. So, you know, we've got Fowler, defence, Shoni Barre, attack, Sol, attack, Bone, defence, Booty, Corn, midfield. And then you've obviously got Binnom and Greenidge in the defence as well. So we're covering quite a few key areas there for me. I think we could go out and get another goalkeeper. As I mentioned before, I don't think it's crucial to retain the keepers we've got at the club, although I don't think they'd be that bad in the south. But it's very important to remember that currently, including loans, we've got 32 players on the books at Maidstone. 8 of them being loans, including the likes of Dan Bardham, Kevin Burko, Viggers, Torre, many others as well. I'm not entirely sure if I've included Galvin and Lawson in that list too, but 32 players is way too many, and we're probably going to see 10 less than that next season. I think we'll probably have a max squad size of about 22, so we can't retain everybody. We're going to have to lose at least 10 players, probably 15 players, maybe even pushing 20 players, and just keep maybe like 10 or 11 of them who can bulk out the squad and then bring new players in. So we are going to lose a lot of people. I think many of the players we've mentioned in the lists already are probably going to move on. Josh Barre, for me, probably going to move on. Regan Booty, probably going to move on. Reece Greenidge, maybe as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if we lost a lot of these very high quality players, but I'd love to see them retain for next season. So thank you everybody so much for your interaction in terms of this video. Obviously it wouldn't have been made possible without everybody's comments and suggestions on who they'd like to see for next season. Of course, this video is all about creating conversation, so if there's anything you disagree with or anyone who wasn't mentioned in this video that you do feel we need to try and keep hold of for next season, leave it in the comments below. That's what is most important about this sort of thing for me and many other fans as well. We all want to see what everyone else is thinking. So if you did enjoy this video, do subscribe, of course, do leave a like and do comment your suggestions below, and I'll catch you all in the next video.